friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica. Today we are going to be talking about fabric bleed, how you can prevent it, and how you can fix it if it happens to you. So today we're going to be talking about fabric bleed. Now, if you've been following me for any length of time, you know I do a lot of high contrast quilts, typically with a white background, kind of case in point all over behind me here. So unfortunately, fabric bleed is something that can happen to anyone. I personally haven't had any issues with fabric bleed until just recently, and I will share that story with you soon and how I fixed it. But let's go ahead and start out with tip number one on how to prevent fabric bleed. So one of the easiest ways to prevent fabric bleeding is to pre-wash your fabrics, especially darker fabrics like navies or reds or browns. Those can really be kind of your bleeder type fabrics. In my opinion, a second way is to buy a little bit higher quality fabrics. Now, I have definitely had a horrible experience with a lower quality fabric, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But personally, I've always purchased a little bit better quality fabrics. I tend to stick with more well-known brands, and they, I would say, range from about $10 or so per yard, and the solids are even a little bit less, like maybe $8 or so a yard. So they're not super expensive, but they can be more than something you might find at a big box chain store. And I think when you really think about all the time and energy that you're putting into your quilt projects, saving like $10 or $15 just really isn't worth it down the road if you're going to have bleeding issues with your fabric. So I do suggest buying higher quality fabric. Now, with the pre-washing, I have to admit that I am not a pre-washer. I have never pre-washed. That's probably one of the most common questions that I get is, do you pre-wash your fabric? And I do not. The only fabric that I would ever pre-wash is a flannel, and that's just because flannel shrinks at a higher rate than my regular quilting cotton. And if you don't pre-wash the flannel, it can actually scrunch up your quilt if you're mixing it with quilting cottons. But otherwise, I never pre-wash. I prefer the feel of the fabric right as it comes off the bolt. It's just nice and smooth, and I feel like I get much crisper and cleaner cuts that way than if you pre-wash it and then try and press it. And even if you starch it at that point, I just feel like you never quite get it as smooth and flat as it is when it comes off the bolt. So that's just my personal opinion. So I don't pre-wash. However, I do wash with color catchers, and I always wash in cold water, and then I throw in 1 or 2 color catchers depending on how much contrast I have in my quilt and then how worried I am that it's going to bleed. And that method has actually worked with me. I've been quilting for I've been quilting for about, I want to say 7 years, and I've never had a quilt bleed like the one I'm about to show you. So let's just review. You can pre-wash your fabric if you like. That will definitely help out with the bleeding because you'll get most of the fabric dye that it's going to come out in that cycle of wash. Just be careful if you're washing your regular clothes right after that. There could still be some residual dye left in your machine, and that can get on your clothes. So just be careful doing that. The second method is to use color catchers and wash in cold water, which is my method. That's always what I do, and like I said, I've never had a problem with it. And then the third thing would be to just buy decent quality fabrics. Don't skimp on your quilt projects. Unless you're doing all super dark fabrics, then it might not be a big deal, but I just feel like all that time and effort, you just don't want it to be wasted on a fabric that bleeds really bad and ruins your quilt after you've spent all that time. So those are my 3 tips on prevention. Let's talk about how to fix it if it happens to you. So this lovely quilt here is my Winterberry quilt, and as you can see, it's very high contrast with the whites and the reds. And I made this quilt a few years ago now. I don't remember the exact year that it came out, but I hadn't washed it yet because really it was just kind of thrown in our living room, It was on the couch, and it was only for Christmas, and then we would put it away, and so I just hadn't washed it. And so this year my daughter had it on her bed, and I thought, okay, she's been sleeping with this, we should probably wash this quilt. And I did my standard throw it in the wash with cold water and a color catcher. I only had 1 color catcher left. I was out of color catchers, and I just did it on a quick wash, and here's what happened. So I didn't take pictures of it when I first pulled it out of the wash, which now I'm regretting because I could show you, but it really had these huge hot pink dye splotches all over the white. Like, it was 100% ruined. And of course, I was devastated because this quilt took a long time to make. I put a lot of effort into it, and I just was like panicking. So the method we used to try and remove the fabric bleed on this quilt was the Dawn dishwashing method, and I will say that it was pretty successful, so I wanted to share it with you. So step number 1 is to fill your bathtub with as hot of water as you can, and then about a cup of Dawn dishwashing detergent. Ultra Pure is better, but I didn't have any last night. I just used this regular kind. It's not ideal, but it does appear to be working to get some of the red out. And you can see over here just how pink this water is. This quilt's been soaking overnight for about 12 hours. And look at all of that dye that has come out. I also think that it would be beneficial to throw a color catcher in here as well to soak up some of that dye. But you basically just want to fill your bathtub high enough that your quilt can be completely submerged and then let it soak overnight. Now, step number 2 is going to be to drain this out, get fresh water put in here, more dishwashing detergent, and let it soak again. And you're just going to want to repeat that process until your water runs clear. So that's what we're going to do now. But already, and I forgot to take pictures last night because it was dark when I pulled this out of the wash, and so I didn't film it. But already it does appear that a lot of the color spotting that I had is now gone. So you can kind of still see some pinks in here, but this quilt last night had big blotches of hot pink dye everywhere in the white section. So it's already looking a lot better. And I'm gonna go ahead and drain this tub, put in a new fresh batch of soap and clean water, and then I'll catch back up with you. All right, this is the second one. So definitely lighter color of water, so that's better. But there's still some red on there, so we're going to do it again. It's pretty light on this side.
Multiple times.
Yeah, so we're just gonna keep doing this until our water runs clean. This is the second time. Jason's gonna help me squeeze it out because it's like super thick and heavy. And the fur isn't taking the pink at all. That's interesting. So we just went ahead and repeated this process over and over and over. I want to say it took us about 5 times of just being diligent. We soaked it in the sudsy water overnight, and I ended up flipping it upside down so the red fabric was down into the water. Ironically, or amazingly enough, the white faux fur on the backing didn't even remotely take the dye at all. I mean, it just stayed white throughout this whole process. But we left it upside down in there, and we just let it soak for about 12 hours at a time. So we put it in the morning, change it at night, let it soak overnight again, change it the next morning. And so for about 3 days we did this, and I think about 5 different soaks. And then for the last 2 soaks, we didn't add any soap because there was so much soap already in the quilt. We decided to just do a clear water soak. So we filled up the tub, you know, squeezed out as much of the soap as we could, and then we just rinsed it a couple times. Then we squeezed out as much water as we could, threw it back in the washing machine, again on a cold cycle with, I didn't actually put any soap in at that time, and then just washed it, and then we stuck it in the dryer just to kind of see where we were at. Now here's where we're at, and I think it looks like it's coming up pretty white on the camera here. I do have some lights on in here just so that it doesn't look too dark. There is a tiny slight pink tint still to the white fabric. It doesn't really bother me too much, but I can see it just slightly. And if that happens to you, you can also use a product called Synthropal, and I will link that below. And you kind of do a similar method where you dilute it with some water and let it sit in there for a little bit, and then you can pull it out and wash it. And that is actually a product that is meant to release dye from fabric. And so I haven't done that on this quilt yet, but I did want to give you one extra step in case the Dawn dishwashing step didn't work for you to try. And I have heard lots of good success stories from that. So if that in my mind is kind of like the last ditch effort. I think the Dawn was probably the easiest, and I do really think that it did a great job. I don't have any large pink dye spots on this quilt anymore, so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful it wasn't ruined. Now, one thing, I'll try and insert a picture here of what this quilt originally looked like, because of course with the dye releasing, this red actually brightened up quite a bit. This used to be a really dark kind of deep red, and now it's a really sort of bright, I don't know, bright lighter red really. And so I just can't even believe how much dye came out of this fabric. It was quite astonishing. I've never had that much dye come out before. So this is what I'm left with. I think I'm happy with it, but like I said, if you still have some residual and you can't get rid of it, you can try the Synthropal. I think I'm saying it correctly. I'll make sure I link the right product in the description box below if I'm not. But that will be kind of your last step to really get the rest of the dye out. So I'm happy with this. I'm probably gonna leave it this way, but I did want to share these tips with you because I figure it happens probably to all of us. We've probably all had something bleed at one point or another, and so I want to share the tips on how I salvaged and saved my beloved Winterberry quilt. This is a pattern on my website. It's a beautiful, fun pattern, but as you can see, there are a ton of tiny little blocks in here. My husband's first reaction was like, oh, just make another one. And I was like, So anyways, I think I managed to save it, and I just wanted to share these tips with you in case any of you are struggling with your fabric bleed. Hopefully they helped you out. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions on the process or what we did for this quilt, please make sure to leave them in comments below, and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you next time.